Saludos a todos. Bienvenidos a esta edición de Conversaciones en el Museo de Arqueología y Antropología de San Marcos. Hoy les vamos a presentar a las creadoras del libro para niños Sharuko, el arqueólogo peruano Julio C, escrito por la autora Mónica Brown, ilustrado por Elisa Chavarri y publicado por la editorial Lowe. Entonces, hoy nos acompaña Mónica Brown. Ella es escritora peruano-estadounidense y tiene muchos libros premiados en donde destaca la identidad latinoamericana. Entre sus publicaciones tenemos las de la serie de libros de Lola Divine, Saraí, y también ha publicado cuentos sobre personajes muy conocidos de Latinoamérica, como Tito Puente, Celia Cruz, Gabriel García Márquez y Pelé. Además, Mónica es profesora de inglés en la Universidad de Norte Arizona y se especializa en literatura latina y literatura multicultural. Elisa Chavarri es ilustradora independiente, nació en Lima, creció en Michigan y se graduó con honores de la Escuela de Arte y Diseño de Savannah. Ella se especializó en animación clásica y cómics. Además, ha ilustrado cuentos con identidad latinoamericana, como Rainbow Weaver, tejedora del arco iris, en donde aborda la tradición textil de los mayas, Federico y el Lobo, que es una versión del clásico cuento de la Caperucita, y el pequeño libro dorado de Frida Kahlo, en donde los niños pueden conocer más acerca de la vida y obra de esta gran artista. Well, first of all, I want to congratulate you on the book. It's very beautiful and interesting. Tell me, how did you want to get into the world of children's books, and what are your influences?
Thank you, Katia. Es un placer hablar contigo. Bienvenidos a todos. I was inspired to write for children when I became a mother, and I looked around and there weren't children's books written about the amazing contributions of the artists and politicians and great personajes of the Americas. And I wanted my children to know about my favorite author, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and I wanted them to learn about Frida Kahlo, and I wanted them to have fictional picture books that had families like ours. So I wrote Marisol McDonald Doesn't Match, Marisol McDonald No Combina, about a little Peruvian and European girl growing up in the United States, the child of two cultures. My greatest inspiration is my mother. I am in front of one of her paintings, mi mamá. She was an amazing artist, and she was born in Piura, in northern Peru, Isabel Maria Wexler Valdivieso, and she immigrated to the United States, and she was such a brilliant artist, and picture books, writing for children, are the place where art meets language and text to create something beautiful. So that inspired me, and I wanted children to have a reason to be proud and to enjoy and see themselves reflected in literature.
Thank you. And Elisa?
Gracias, Katia. And I want to say that it's such an honor to have this book be recognized by your museum, the museum that Tello started. So it really feels like we did something right to be recognized by your museum. One of my greatest inspirations was also my mother, who was also born in Peru, in Chachapoyas, and she's always instilled the arts in us. And I came from a family that always valued the arts, be it drawing or music. And my grandfather actually would write stories for me. So I think just having that environment early on got me inspired to pursue drawing and painting from as long as I can remember. And I guess from there, from him telling me stories and me wanting to see them come to life, illustrated, my uncle would illustrate them. And then watching cartoons, that was my other second inspiration, I guess, watching cartoons and Disney, and is why I went into animation. But even when you're studying animation, they tell you that the most important thing is the story. The story is what will carry it along, and you can make it as pretty as you want, but the most important thing is the story. So that's kind of how I got into it, pursuing animation.
Okay, my grandma is from Chachapoyas too.
Oh.
Okay, next question. Between research, writing, and illustration, how was the work process to make Sharuko?
It was an amazing process, and I enjoyed it so much. I have something to share, and that is that when my mother was a young adolescent, her family moved to Lima, and she lived on Julio C Boulevard in the Lince neighborhood of Lima. And so when I went back and forth to Peru with her, and when we went, we'd stay for 2 or 3 months because it was then it was such an expensive ticket, so we could only go every few years. And every visit, she would take me and my sister, and the last trip we made together, she took my children to visit the house on Julio C where she lived, just even though we didn't know who lived there anymore. So I always knew who this figure was. And in this moment, where I live in Arizona, there are many indigenous communities, and I know how important it is for indigenous peoples to share their own stories. And I wanted to share the story of Sharuko because his is incredible. Very rarely, during his time, there were not indigenous archaeologists telling their own story and this incredible ancient history of Peru, and that didn't have the language skills of speaking Quechua and the commitment to not only understanding ancient indigenous cultures, but also living indigenous cultures and preserving and conserving these sites, and also in the founding of the museum, making them available to all Peruvians, because instead of the discrimination during his time that indigenous people faced and still do, he wanted to instill a sense of pride and also to make change in various ways. The research, I was very lucky. There's an amazing archaeologist, Dr. Tantalean, at the University of San Marcos, and I read his book on Peruvian archaeology. There are other scholars that have focused on Julio C. There's a collection of his writings that I read front to back, and I know Elisa consulted as well, edited by Dr. Richard Berger, an archaeologist at Yale University in the United States. So the process was exciting. It was one of a discovery. I knew who he was, but I didn't know that his tia, who was a maid in the presidential palace, helped pay his fees. I didn't know he traveled to Lima on horseback and worked at the train station to support himself. So his journey was absolutely amazing, and I enjoyed doing the very important part, which is researching to honor his life with respect and accuracy.
Okay. And Elisa?
Para mí también, this was a project that I was immediately excited about to have pitched to me, because some projects come your way and you take it on for the job, but this project was like, no matter what, I was like, yes, I absolutely want to do this project. For one, to work with Monica, and because of it's a Peruvian story about a Peruvian hero who I had heard about and knew a little bit about, but it was very interesting to get to delve in deeper into the research. And that's one thing that's different about historical books or biographical books compared to other books where you basically get to do whatever you want. This involves so much research, way more research that actually then ends up on the page. And that was a process that is very interesting and also challenging to try to get right. Because you want, like Monica said, you want to honor the subject matter. You want to make sure you're getting it right. So yeah, very interesting and exciting project for me.
And I will say, rarely do artists and illustrators put the level of research and passion into a project as Elisa does. I don't know if you have this book in your library or do yet, but even the end papers are works of art.
Yes, the digital version, I saw that.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I feel so grateful that I got to work with Elisa.
Well, thank you.
I hope after this book, she isn't so famous that I never get to work with her again.
Yeah, right. No, thank you so much. The honor's mine to work with you, absolutely.
And Monica, what do you think were the challenges in being able to communicate the story of Julio C to the children? How did you come to put together his story?
Well, that's a great question. It's always challenging. People sometimes think that it's easier to write for children because they're short books, but I feel an enormous responsibility because their minds are young. I think they can understand very complex processes because their minds are also very open and their imaginations are big. So the challenge was, with all this knowledge, how to put it in language that inspires children, and then how to talk about complex subjects. And that's where working with a brilliant artist really helps, because how do you depict the moment of colonization?
Yes.
Which is violent and which involves death. But how do you do that in a way that honors history and also allows children to understand but not be harmed? And we decided to not just have a terrible scene of all what happened during colonization, but to have images of indigenous culture and illustrate, as you can see, the gold in the middle, of the greed behind it, the desire for gold and money and power, and then with historically accurate images of literally the Spanish buildings on the walls created by indigenous peoples of Cusco. And in this spread, you notice that the colonizers are small, because we didn't want the story to be about them and what they did. We wanted to teach the history, but still emphasize that the indigenous history is still vibrant and living. And I've been to Cusco and Machu Picchu for the festival of Inti Raymi. I see the vibrant culture that continues. This is the first time, I believe, ever in a children's book, there is a word in Quechua in there, because people don't realize that in the United States, that they learn about the Incas, but they don't know that there are millions of Peruvians that speak indigenous languages in Quechua, that it's not something of the past, but it's something of the present. So I fought and persuaded to have Sharuko to be in the title of the book, and I hope that inspires indigenous children in the United States and in the Americas.
Okay. And Elisa, how did you put together the whole process to illustrate the book? Do you have an idea what a page will look like, or are you putting it together little by little? What techniques do you use?
That's a big question, because it's both ways. Sometimes the text inspires an immediate idea that you think would be exciting and will also help tell the story. Sometimes I always anyway try to think about how my illustration can enhance the story. You can tell more than what the text is saying, and also be fun and exciting and nice to look at for kids. And so sometimes an image just pops to your mind, and sometimes it's a lot of work with small thumbnail sketches. I have, like, these are some of my different ideas for the cover. For example, some of them are very bad, but you just start little by little getting them out of the way. And actually the illustration that Monica showed, that one was a lot of work, and because I did not get that one right away. And not many people are aware of this, that in the publishing industry, authors and illustrators don't get to collaborate at all. Like, usually you don't collaborate much at all. You work with the editors. We did. So we were having trouble with the spread. The editors actually, after a few rounds of sketches, they will send the sketches to the author, in this case Monica, and this one just was not working. And the editors are like, Monica's willing to speak with you. Would you like to speak with her? I was like, yes, absolutely. So we really worked on that spread together to figure out the best way to tell that sensitive subject matter. So.
Elisa, can you talk about this spread? Because this is an unusual spread to find in a children's book, and yet it has a beautiful message behind it too, and it's so striking.
Thank you. Yes, this ended up being one of my favorite spreads as well, but it was another one that at first, when I read the text, I had absolutely no idea what I would illustrate here. Because it talks about how the skulls that he discovered as a child, his future, his destiny, to what he would end up doing in his life. So I think for children, the visual image of a skull is always just very exciting. So that just kind of popped to my head, like this could really be the focal point that takes the young Sharuko to his future. So I thought it would just be a nice big impact to show it across the page and try to show a little bit of, like, predict what's to come with what he does with his life and his studies and his writings and discoveries. So that was the thought process behind it.
When I saw this sketch, I thought, wow, this is brilliant, because he found these skulls and they used to pay to have bones sent to Lima and studied. And later, when he was working, he worked for Ricardo Palma, the great figure in Peruvian letters. And he saw a magazine that featured these skulls, and he ended up studying medicine at San Marcos, and he ended up, his thesis was about how ancient, his ancestors performed successful brain surgeries, trephination, on these very skulls. And so it was evidence of how advanced they were in medicine, again, countering the stereotypes and instilling pride. So I really loved this sketch, and I knew children would love it too.
Okay, and how do you come to decide the title of the book?
Well, the title, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I had a disagreement with my editors about the title, because you may know that the field of anthropology is exciting. In the United States, children might think of Indiana Jones and explorers and the past, but I wanted something that was represented the present too. And so I did want to have the Quechua word in the title, Sharuko, because it means brave. And to do what Sharuko did was very, very brave. Luckily, I have an amazing relationship with this press, Lee and Low, and the publishers in the United States. And because I already had several books with them, we had a wonderful conversation, and they agreed to have this title. So I wanted both. I wanted his nickname. I wanted a Quechua word. I love the word. It's a beautiful word. I love the idea of courage. And then it's a nonfiction book about an important person. So it's just Peruvian archaeologist Julio C, el arqueólogo peruano Julio C. So in the subtitle, it really was about the fact that this is about a historical figure. And in the big title, it was just a celebration of his bravery and an indigenous language.
Okay. And during the research process on the life of Julio C, and I see that it's also reflected in the book, you emphasize its importance because he did not remain just as another collector, but he went further to understand our history. What do you think about his work?
I think, well, the founding of the museum was amazing because children of all classes, of all backgrounds can have access to this forever. There were many people that were interested in exporting these artifacts, and the more that can be kept and conserved in Peru for Peruvians in the future, the more important it is. I love that he trained the next generation of in the scientific method in archaeology in Peru. So I admire very much many things about his life.
And Elisa?
Yeah, likewise, that he was so adventurous, and what he did was hard, especially in the time when he did it, when there was so much prejudice, more prejudice against indigenous peoples, and his great discovery in Chavin that the culture of Peru originated from Peru itself is such a great source of pride for all Peruvians, but especially for indigenous Peruvians. And then to share that with everybody, that wealth of knowledge with the museums and his writings, is incredibly important for Peruvians, and to have that perspective of studying his own culture. It always been studied by outsiders before. So I think that's one of the greatest, more important things about him.
And he collaborated, he co-founded with many other archaeologists, the Institute for Andean Studies, etc. So it's not that he was insular, he had a very global perspective, but he was also political. He ran for office. He wanted to do better by his people, his community, and by the people of Peru, which is why he's a national hero.
One thing that I like very much about this book is that it not only talks about Tello's life as an academic, but it also tells us about his family that helped him in his career. And it's also dedicated to Peruvian children, and Elisa's mother, who is Peruvian, and she always fostered a love for our country in you. And how did you decide to show that side of Tello's life?
Well, for me, I think for children, when you write for children, they want to connect to another child. So it was important for me, always, when I write about historical figures, like when I wrote about Gabriel Garcia Marquez, I talked about a little boy whose imagination was great and big and wild. They want to identify with a young character, and he's a great character to identify with because he had a remarkable life. He didn't have an easy path, and his family there who helped him, really his tia, who helped pay his school fees, his father who worked to support him, the Palma family, Ricardo Palma, Julio C became friends with his son. And after Tello's father died, he had even less resources. And so Ricardo Palma hired him to do errands for him. And he would always have him come back around the time to eat, lunchtime, so he could feed him. So for many people who achieve great things, there are all the people behind. Tello's family, his tia, Ricardo Palma and his family that helped along the way.
Okay, and Elisa?
I love that aspect of the story because it shows no matter how talented or hardworking you are, you need those people to give you the opportunity to help you along. It's important to give people opportunities to realize their full potential. So yeah, I really thought that was a nice aspect of the story. And I tried to include Ricardo Palma there in the illustration in the background of the library because I did want to make note of that.
Another thing that I highlight from the book is the importance given to Tello for being a Peruvian that is fundamental in telling our own history. And also in the illustrations, many can feel identified. Tell us, how important do you think cultural representation is in children's books?
I think it's incredibly important. There is a famous educator in the United States. She's African-American. Her name was Rudine Sims Bishop, and she said that books are windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors, that they can be a mirror for children to see themselves in, or they can be a window into other cultures and to walk out into and discover other parts of the world. And I'm sure that that is the same for all children. At one time in the United States, and to a certain extent still, there were no mirrors for Latino children, Latina children. There were very few mirrors in books where African-American children or indigenous children could open a book and see themselves. And it's important for indigenous children to see books with people that look like them, that share their history, or mestizo children too, because that makes up so much of Peruvian, including my family, history. But also for those who are not, to have a window into this culture that's rich and interesting, and that way they can understand the contributions of Peruvians to all of the Americas and to our knowledge of ourselves and history and archaeology.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, I think Monica explained it beautifully. I do think it's very important because everyone deserves to be able to be inspired by somebody that they can identify with. You can be inspired by anybody, but when it's someone that you can identify with more closely, it can be just that much more powerful. And on the other side too, how it can be a door for everybody else. It's just another perspective to try to understand where other people are coming from, what other people have gone through. It's just really important in order to be able to relate better with other people on the planet.
Okay, Elisa, also I want to add that I really like that apart from the beautiful ceramics, the book shows us the very particular forms of the Paracas tombs, the Paracas textile art, and the detail of the hairless dog on several pages. Have you grown up with the influence of Peruvian art, or did this come up during your research?
I have absolutely grown up with the influence of Peruvian art, largely because of my mother. She has always been absolutely fascinated by the ceramics and the weavings and anything artisanal. And she actually she was very excited about me illustrating this story too, because she was a doctor. She studied in La Cayetano, and as an elective, she took archaeology, and we have little artifacts, replicas all over our house, framed in little frames. We had a replica of some of the Paracas tapestries with the flying shamans. I grew up with that on our walls. So I still had to do a lot of research to make sure I got it right and accurate, but it wasn't foreign to me. And yeah, she's fostered almost to the point of obsession, like a love for everything Peruvian in us, like the hairless dog. I grew up knowing about those. And so yeah, this is why I was so happy too to get to illustrate this, because it's stuff I've been excited about thanks to my mother growing up.
And in this context of a pandemic, where several of us had to migrate to online education and with several children who spend hours playing video games, tell me, how do you see the use and challenges to be able to communicate our history to children through digital platforms?
Well, ideally, we can take a few breaks and read books together with parents and children, because it is a break and it is a slower way to learn and to spend time looking at the details. But books are very expensive. Not everyone has access to them. So I'm very happy that my publishers, for example, have allowed, and many publishers in the United States have, during the pandemic, relaxed their copyright laws enough for us to put story times out on the internet. So on YouTube for author Monica Brown, and at my website, if you click on for teachers at monicabrown.net, I have many videos of me reading, having hora de cuentos for children. And then now I'm an educator, I'm a professor. I work with educators of young children to create curriculums and activities around this book and Elisa's art. And so Sharuko has, Monica Oliveira created the most amazing activity guide for this book. So even if you can't get this physical book, I believe I have a video reading it. You can listen to it, and then there's lots of activities that you can link to on the website. Obviously, having children looking at computers isn't ideal, but that's why we need to include creative literature in their curriculum, because it is of a different sort than textbooks.
And Elisa?
Yeah, it's definitely been a challenge. I've been homeschooling this whole time, and the thing I think people are discovering is that the more interaction and personable you can make it, the more interested children are going to be. So yeah, if I've been asked to do more little interviews or digital video author visits, and to stay close like that with people, to still have the personal contact as much as possible. I think that's important. And I almost feel like parents should be educated as to how to be educators this day and age, because I realized, you know, what an art that can be and how difficult it is to make learning fun and interesting and not intimidating for children. Yeah, this isn't really something I'd have the answer to. Hopefully we can.
Well, I hope at least we all have more appreciation for teachers after this.
Yeah.
And do you have any advice for those who work in the area of telling our history to children?
Advice? Well, I think that two things. One, we want to make history accessible to children, but we also want to share the complexity of it and the issues related to social justice, because I personally feel that we need, in our world, more compassion, more understanding for those in our community. So I believe in a justice-oriented education to teach children to think critically. So the true history of our various communities and cultures. So I don't know that I have advice. Like Elisa says, we all do the best we can. I am a teacher, but I teach university students. But in my books, I seek to teach. So I guess it's telling a story that's interesting and lyrical, but also accurate, that helps children think critically and understand in ways that help them grow and learn with hopefully less prejudice, with more compassion to others, and with the sense of, you know, there's a lot of talk about borders, but my mother, maybe because she was from South America and my father was from North America, always told us that we were citizens of the world. And I like that concept, even if it's hard to put into reality.
And Elisa?
As far as illustrations go for historically accurate material, I would say it's just very important to research it, do the proper amount of research to get it as accurate as possible, as true to the material, and honor the story you're telling. So to me, that's something very important. And then within those bounds, try to make it exciting, like try to convey the story with your illustrations and in a fun way that will be engaging to others. Yeah, like Monica said too, it's just a lot of experimentation and figuring it out as well. Each project's different, but definitely I think research for a historical story to have it be accurate was very important to me.
And finally, tell us about your latest projects and the networks where we can find your work.
Wow, I have a lot of future projects coming that I can't talk about yet. Publishing is very strange. I have a new series that's coming out that will be fantasy, but I can't talk about it. And I have a chapter book that I can't talk about, and a picture book yet. But I can talk about my next book that's coming out it's another biography on two U.S. Latinx, as we say in the United States, politicians, Julio and Joaquin Castro, and it's called Small Rooms, Big Dreams. And I have another book set in Peru that's coming out after that, and it's called The Turquoise Room, El Cuarto Turquesa, although we haven't decided about the Spanish translation. But it's about my grandmother, Esther Valdivieso, my mother, Isabel, and me. And it's magical realism. And it's about creativity and adventure and travel. So that, the Turquoise Room, I'm so excited. And it's coming out next year, early 2022, probably winter.
Thank you.
So my website is www.monicabrown.net, and on Twitter I'm at Monica Brown BKS.
Okay. And Elisa?
I also have a few projects I can't talk about, but one of the ones that came out today, actually, you mentioned the little golden book about Frida Kahlo comes out. It's the book birthday, as we say here today. I don't have a copy yet, but I can share with you the cover painting.
That is so gorgeous, Elisa.
Very beautiful.
Thank you. I'm grateful that I got back into painting with traditional media with Sharuko. Up until then, I'd done digital. I've worked in traditional before, but for my books and my other freelance work, I'd been doing mostly digital until Lee and Lowe asked me, well, would you be willing to try a traditional media? And I said, absolutely. And after that, I did Frida traditionally too. With Sharuko was watercolor and Frida was acrylic gouache. But so that's
Elisa Chavarri's biggest fan. I am not and I've worked with many of the greatest illustrators in the United States, but I'm like a super fan of Elisa.
Oh wow, that's a tremendous compliment. Thank you. But I'm a super fan of you as well, so it's mutual. So yeah, that's the book I have coming out today, and I have one more coming out in October, I think, called I'll Hold Your Hand. And then the ones for more in the future, I have another Hispanic book with another Hispanic author that I'm excited to start working on soon. I haven't started that one, but yeah, another random freelance projects. And my work can be found on my website as well, elisachavarri.com.
Okay, thank you very much for your time. I'm delighted to meet you and have talked with you. Again, congratulations on the book. Felicitaciones nuevamente por el libro, y ahora en Perú podemos adquirirlo vía Amazon y espero que muy pronto podamos encontrarlo en nuestras librerías locales. Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias a ti.